Part 1. Introduction and setting the scene. In the shimmering waters of the Caribbean, just off the southern coast of Jamaica, lies a place unlike any other. Today, it is quiet, a sleepy fishing village with swaying palm trees, turquoise waves, and the occasional cry of a seabird. But beneath these calm waters rests one of the most infamous cities in history, a city that in the 17th century was known as the wickedest city on earth. A city that vanished almost entirely in a single, terrible morning. This is the untold story of Port Royal. It is hard to imagine now, but in the late 1600s, Port Royal was a place of unparalleled wealth and excess in the New World. Ships laden with gold, silver, spices, and exotic goods from across the Caribbean docked in its busy harbor. Merchants, pirates, sailors, and fortune seekers from across Europe and Africa crowded its narrow streets. The city's taverns flowed with rum, gambling houses operated day and night, and fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. But with that wealth came a reputation for sin. English missionaries wrote of drunkenness, violence, and moral decay. The town was described as a place where every house was a brothel, every man a gambler, and every street a theater of vice. It was a city where power was measured in gold coins and the number of armed men at your back. And then, on the morning of June 7th, 1692, nature itself rose against Port Royal. In the space of just a few minutes, the ground shook, the sea roared, and more than half of the city slid beneath the waves, never to return. Thousands died, and the survivors were left staring at the calm blue waters that now covered their homes, their riches, and their very way of life. This is a story of ambition, greed, and disaster. But it is also a story of the sea, of how the Caribbean shaped a city, and how the forces of nature reclaimed it in an instant. Part 2. The birth of a pirate capital. To understand the fate of Port Royal, we must go back to its beginning. In 1655, during one of England's many wars with Spain, a fleet commanded by Admiral William Penn, father of the man who would later found Pennsylvania, captured the island of Jamaica from the Spanish. At the time, Jamaica was not the lush, wealthy colony it would later become. The Spanish had only lightly settled it, and much of the island was wilderness. The English needed a way to secure their hold on the island and turn it into a profitable base. They found their answer on a small, sandy spit of land at the mouth of Kingston Harbor. This strip, later known as the Palisadoes, had a deep, sheltered anchorage, perfect for ships. It was here that the English began to build what would become Port Royal. From the start, the settlement had a dual purpose. It was both a naval base to defend Jamaica and a commercial port to attract trade. But what truly made Port Royal flourish was piracy, or more politely, privateering. In the Caribbean of the 17th century, the boundaries between merchant, pirate, and naval officer were thin and often non-existent. The English crown issued letters of marque, legal documents that allowed captains to attack and plunder ships belonging to Spain, England's main rival in the Americas. In return, the privateers paid a share of their loot to the colonial government. It was a system that turned crime into a legitimate business and made Port Royal the most attractive port for buccaneers in the Caribbean. Names like Henry Morgan, Christopher Myngs, and Roche Brasiliano became legends here. These men sailed from Port Royal to raid Spanish ports and treasure fleets, returning with holds full of silver, gold, and precious goods. The city's streets echoed with the clink of coin and the laughter of men who had risked their lives for unimaginable rewards. Part 3. Life in the wickedest city on earth. By the 1670s, Port Royal had transformed from a rough military outpost into a glittering jewel of the Caribbean. Its population swelled to over 6,000, making it one of the largest English cities in the Americas at the time. It was larger than Boston and nearly as wealthy as London in proportion to its size. The architecture reflected its prosperity. Stone warehouses and merchant homes rose along the waterfront, their lower floors packed with barrels of rum, tobacco, and sugar. Narrow streets bustled with traders from England, Holland, France, and beyond. Black slaves, both African-born and Creole, labored in the port, while free black men and women ran shops, taverns, and small businesses of their own. But Port Royal's fame, or infamy, came not from its commerce alone, but from its culture of indulgence. By some accounts, the city had one tavern for every 10 residents. Gambling dens operated openly, and prostitution was rampant. Fights spilled into the streets, and drunken sailors often staggered into the harbor at night, never to be seen again. The English church complained bitterly. Ministers declared Port Royal a den of debauchery, warning that God's wrath would one day destroy it. Many scoffed at the idea, but some took the words to heart, sensing that such wealth built on violence and excess could not last forever. Part 4. The morning of June 7th, 1692. It began like any other day in Port Royal. The tropical sun rose over the calm waters of the harbor, casting golden light on the masts of anchored ships. Merchants opened their shutters, taverns prepared for the day's first customers, and dockworkers shouted to each other as they rolled barrels down to the piers. At precisely 11:43 a.m., without warning, the earth shook. At first, it was a faint tremor, the kind that might make a glass vibrate on a table. But within seconds, the ground convulsed violently. Stone walls cracked, roof tiles crashed into the streets. People screamed as buildings swayed and collapsed around them. Port Royal was built on loose sand, barely above sea level. When the earthquake struck, a phenomenon called liquefaction occurred. The shaking turned the solid ground beneath the city into a thick, unstable slurry. Streets split apart. Entire buildings sank into the ground as if swallowed whole. Eyewitness accounts speak of the earth opening its mouth and swallowing people alive. One man described seeing houses tilt and slide into the harbor while others crumbled into dust. The sand shifted so violently that some victims were buried waist-deep before they could even attempt to flee. And then came the sea. A massive wave, what we would now call a tsunami, surged into the harbor, smashing ships against the shore and sweeping away anyone in its path. The air filled with the roar of collapsing walls, the shouts of the terrified, and the deep, unearthly rumble of the earth itself. In less than 2 minutes, nearly 2/3 of Port Royal had disappeared beneath the water. Hundreds of buildings were gone, and an estimated 2,000 people, 1/3 of the city's population, were dead. Part 5. Chaos and Survival. The earthquake was only the beginning. In the hours and days that followed, the survivors faced a nightmare. The midday sun bore down on the wounded as they searched for loved ones among the ruins. Corpses floated in the harbor, tangled with broken beams and shattered barrels. Fresh water supplies were contaminated, and food quickly became scarce. The heat and the stench of death invited another enemy, disease. Dysentery and fever spread through the makeshift camps of survivors. Within weeks, hundreds more died from illness and starvation. Looting erupted in the ruins. Men armed with cutlasses and pistols prowled the wreckage, searching for coins, jewels, or anything of value. Authorities tried to impose order, but Port Royal's defenses were shattered, not only physically, but morally. The city had been the fortress of English power in the Caribbean. Now it was a ghost of itself. Many saw the disaster as divine punishment. Ministers preached fiery sermons, declaring that God had struck down the wickedest city on earth in judgment. Survivors, haunted by the memories of that morning, could hardly argue. Part 6. The slow death of a city. Efforts were made to rebuild Port Royal. The English Navy fortified what remained of the harbor, and merchants tried to restore trade. But the magic and the prosperity was gone. Many survivors fled across the bay to Kingston, which began to grow as the new commercial hub of Jamaica. In the decades that followed, Port Royal suffered further blows. Another major earthquake in 1907, several devastating fires, and hurricanes that battered the already fragile spit of land. Piece by piece, the city's remnants were claimed by the sea. By the 20th century, only a small fishing village remained where once the pirate capital had stood. But beneath the waves, the old city lay preserved, streets, foundations, pottery, and even perfectly intact bottles of rum, frozen in time since the day of the disaster. Part 7. The Sunken Museum. Today, Port Royal is one of the most important underwater archaeological sites in the world. Since the 1950s, divers and historians have explored the drowned streets, recovering artifacts that tell the story of life in the 17th century. In the murky waters, divers have found clay pipes, pewter plates, gold coins, navigational instruments, and even an entire building, its walls still standing on the seabed. Some rooms still contain furniture, glassware, and personal belongings exactly as they were when the city sank. These discoveries have provided historians with a unique time capsule, a snapshot of a colonial Caribbean port at the height of its power and decadence. Unlike most archaeological sites, which are disturbed by centuries of rebuilding, Port Royal's ruins were sealed in silt and seawater almost instantly, preserving them in remarkable condition. But perhaps the most haunting thing about Port Royal is not its artifacts, but its silence. Standing on the shore today, you can gaze out over the calm blue water, knowing that just meters below lies an entire city, its streets still and its taverns empty, waiting in eternal darkness. Part 8. Closing Reflection. Port Royal's story is a reminder that human ambition can build wonders, but nature holds the final power. The same harbor that once brought wealth and opportunity also delivered destruction. The same sands that supported palaces of stone turned to liquid in moments. In its brief life, Port Royal became a legend, a city of gold, rum, and infamy, where fortunes were made overnight and lives were lost just as quickly. Its sudden death turned it into a cautionary tale told for centuries, proof that no matter how strong a city seems, it is never stronger than the earth beneath it. And so, the waves roll gently over the sunken streets, the gulls circle overhead, and the Caribbean breeze carries with it a whisper, the ghost of the wickedest city on earth.